Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hello and welcome to today's Battlemech review. Today we are going to be looking at the JagerMech, which is one of those weird mechs that exists because it was available for production, even though there are far more prevalent models in the same role. The JagerMech is generally seen as a Federated Sons mech, even though Auskerida have quite a few in their inventory as well, not just due to them stealing quite a bit during the Succession War, but because they have the main factory building them nowadays, at least. The JagerMech is also an odd machine because the Ausdavion people don't always call it the JagerMech. Often enough, it's called the Déchiqueteur, the Shredder, because, well, a lot of people in Ausdavion do speak French as their primary language rather than English, and there's quite a few mechs with their names having been translated or changed in French. Production codes being what they are, the actual production code is what names an actual mech, not its name that we use in general parlance. So let's take a look at this odd duck. Aerospace fighters and conventional fighters, to a more limited extent because they're not as prevalent nowadays, are probably the biggest threat to battlemechs once they're out in the field. Regular combat vehicles are easy to disable. However, tanks are quite fast, but even easier to disable in the end. VTOLs can be pretty threatening, but the fact that they can't be that big and carry that large weapons, except for that darn Hawkmoth and Yellow Jacket, generally means that VTOLs are not as big of a threat as you could think, or as they were, let's say, in the old historical time of the 20th and 21st century. With the advances in military science and technology, especially electronic countermeasure, a lot of those kinds of weapons are not as efficient as they used to be, but something going about the speed of sound, dropping 500 to 1,000 kilos bomb on top of your head, will remain quite effective. There are defenses against the other ASF asset, the main one being having your own planes to defend you against the enemy's plane. Ground-based defenses are sometimes the only option that you really have. And therefore, when you look at mech history, the idea of having a mech being able to take down aircrafts flying over them became quite popular rather quickly. The first mech really dedicated to shooting down aircrafts was the Rifleman. The 1N and 2N version are at 50 tons and were a very common sight during the Age of War and the War of Star League Aggression. The 2N was basically your standard anti-air mech for most of the Star League era as well, with a pair of PPCs, a decent number of heat sinks, and medium lasers. It was probably the better Rifleman once you look into it, and I'm not sure why the 3N was released other than Kalon wanting to make even more money on a named design. And that 3N series started coming out just as the American Civil War was heating up and all that good stuff, so it wasn't that prevalent at that time, at least. There was also another mech in that category that came out in 2570 from Mitchell's vehicle. The Galahad was a response to the Rifleman, which was dominating the market at the time. The first one followed the original principle with energy weapon, which was very good at shooting down planes that were flying around, and it was cooled down by a decent amount of heat sinks, but it was a bit slower and wasn't as good in stand-up fights. So it wasn't maybe as popular as a Rifleman, and it wasn't sold to as many people. The 2D Galahad was a little bit bigger, and it packed a pair of Gauss rifle, which were really, really devastating against aerospace assets, even though it meant that it wouldn't be able to stay in the field just as long. It is quite likely that this 2D Galahad is what inspired our friends at Kalon to make the Rifleman bigger, however. The American Civil War was really where a lot of those mechs were tested for the first time in real full-scale war situations. The Rifleman was found wanting in quite a few places. The Galahad was hard to maintain, far from supply lines. You had a fully upgraded Rifleman 2 at 80 tons, which mixed the problems of the two other machines. Kalon sat down and tried to figure out what they could do to keep a foot in the door in the AA gun market. And that's where our JagerMech is going to come in. So your first JagerMech started coming out of factories in 2774, and it tried to fix a few issues that the Rifleman and the Galahad had. People really complained that the Rifleman, especially the newest version at 60-ton, ran quite hot, was poorly armored, and couldn't stay in the field very long because of limited ammo supplies. All the modern upgrade kits and the Galahad needed endo steel and specialized weapon in order to function properly as well. So the engineers started sitting down and tried to go through all of these problems and tried to solve as many as possible in one single machine. The one thing they were not able to figure out, though, was how to make the darn thing tougher. The JM6S JagerMech only has 6 tons of armored plates on its body, making it incredibly under-armored for a 65-ton mech. This is basically the armor of a light mech, or at least a light frontline mech. It does use a Magna 260 engine, which is fairly common for mech of that weight range, to go up to 64 kilometers per hour, which is decent enough in the era where it was released. It also doesn't require an XL engine or anything fancy, so for that, it is commendable in that period of time here in the late 28th century. Your arm feature a pair of Midron autocannons, a 5 class and a 2 class, allowing you to take down aircrafts with flak ammo, or just shoot down just about everything, since those can be fairly efficient if you use specialty ammo at least. At closer range, you have a pair of standard medium lasers, which gives you a decent amount of firepower if something gets close by, like a scout or something just to harass you. 10 heat sinks doesn't sound like a whole lot, but the JagerMech uses mainly ballistic weapon, so it's not going to run hot unless you shoot all those autocannons you've ran and shoot those medium lasers, and even there, it's only going to generate a very small heat spike. Strangely enough, people still complained that 6 tons of armor on a 65-ton mech was not enough. Imagine that. The people at Kalon turned around and started thinking of what they could do to maybe toughen up the hide, and what they came with as a response was the JM6A, which came out in 2778, which is the design I like the most in that particular era of JagerMech. This one replaces the AC-5s with a pair of Zeus 15 rack LRMs in the arms with 2 tons of reload, which is enough for most engagement, and the armor is toughened up by 2 tons. 8 tons of plates on a 65-ton mech is still not quite a whole lot, but it's more than what you had on the original and is okay, unless you're going to get into stand-up fights. AC-2s are still quite lackluster, but if you use flak rounds or a precision ammo as an example, it's going to do what it's meant to do. But I think we probably could have put a pair of 10 rack LRMs in the arms instead and keep the 5 class autocannons. Something along those lines would have been better, in my opinion at least. Of course, nowadays, the main AA gun you're going to see on the battlefield is probably the Partisan heavy tank / AA gun. And it's been a very popular source of anti-air firepower in the inner sphere since its introduction in 2791. The people at Kalon made these using the same basic concepts as the Rifleman and the JagerMech, and it works remarkably well. It's got 4 5-class autocannon, meaning you can load flak rounds on it in order to just fill the air with flak, and an 80-ton vehicle will run you about half the price of even a basic Rifleman and JagerMech. So those are much easier to at least procure. Are they easier to deploy? Not really, because battlemechs remain easier to deploy than a standard armor. But if you're going to defend a base or protect an airfield, something along those lines, really the Partisan is going to be your best bet. So the Federated Sons were the one running the vast majority of them as AA guns and line combat unit, because in the Succession War, even a AA gun is going to be used as a battering ram if required. The main factory for the design was on the moon of Talon on the system of Wernke, until the Jihadis blew it up with nukes in 3069s. Until then, it was pumping those out like candies, and nowadays, with a lot of cleaning, I think the factory is back online. The second facility was on Quentin, and this one passed hands between the Fed Sons and the Combine over the year, and the contracts that the people at Kalon had allowed them to sell it to both sides of the border. So really, if you want to look at a JagerMech, it'll probably have a Fed Sons paint scheme. or a Curitan paint scheme. One of the two. The clan invasion version of the JagerMech was the JM6DE, and it was introduced just as things were being kicked off for Operation Revival. First Prince Anstavion was quite magnanimous with the design and basically offered it to the Draconis Combine and Theodore Kurita at the Summit of Outreach, and it started production on Quentin as well. This new model is toughened up quite a bit. Strangely enough, it doesn't sound like it because you only add an extra half ton of plates. But those plates are now ferrofibrous weave, so you get an extra bump in protection just from that. The 5-class autocannons are now Ultra models, so you basically double your rate of fire on most of them. It does suffer from using an XL engine rather than a standard, and it swaps the medium lasers with medium pulse lasers, which is an entirely bad idea. You probably could have made the IDE tougher and kept just the 2 standard medium lasers, and it would have been more efficient. In 3054, a field refit became popular enough that Kalon and Independence Weapons started producing it as a standard. The JM6DG kind of imitates your earlier Galahad by sticking a Gauss rifle in each arm along with 6 tons of reloads. The lasers are brought back to standard medium lasers as well. This is going to devastate just about any AOSF that's going to fly around, and things like the Galahad were getting back into production in some areas, but they weren't very common still. So this was probably going to be one of your best press button delete aircraft mech out there, at least for a while. I personally would have stuck with 4 tons of reloads and 2 extra tons of plates just to make the thing tougher. But still, there was another version, the Laser DGR, which upgraded the medium lasers to ER medium lasers, which gives you a nice little bump in range, which might be enough. And your cooling kit is upgraded to double heat sinks, which is, well, not quite essential, but useful with those ER lasers. Strangely enough, the Marian and Gemini had a decent amount of JagerMech in their inventory, and they wanted to upgrade them for their invasion of the Lothian League and the Illyrian Palatinate in the 3060s. What they did was put 10 tons of ferrofibrous weave on the body and upgrade the heat sinks, the double heat sinks. And what they put as guns is a pair of large lasers and LB2X autocannons with a single ton of reloads, which is not quite enough. I always like to have one of each of clusters and slugs with those LBX. Rather than medium lasers, it goes with a Marian Classic for a backup with 6 tubes of 15 rockets for single use in order to delete whatever is in front of you. The last upgrade kit for your basic JagerMech came out in 3070 with the JM6DDA. This one is a very simple upgrade, and you put 2 standard 5-class autocannons in the arm and 2 light AC2s. Those have similar range bracket, so you're going to have a very good punch at a very specific range. You got a lot of ammo bins, so you can fill those up with all sorts of specialty ammo, and you get 2 regular medium lasers to defend yourself at closer range. You also have a targeting computer, meaning that all of those weapons are going to be quite accurate. What is great about it is that it's actually fairly cheap to build and to maintain, which is not a thing that you always have on some of those more modern JagerMechs. After 3058, though, the production of the JagerMech was split into, well, I'm going to say 3 branches since the original was still in production in some places. But you really had 2 main deviation from the original JagerMech. You had a replacement 70-ton JM7 series, and you had Victor Steiner Davion's Davion Pride JagerMech 3. We'll do a full video on the JagerMech 3 at some point, probably. But you just know that the JM6D3 is still 65 tons, but it uses a brand new chassis and equipment with a larger Vox 325 engine to give you a speed of up to 86 kilometers per hour, which is equivalent to most clan mech of the time. The body is protected by 9.5 tons of ferrofibrous plates, which is more than your original JagerMech as well. You've got an endo steel chassis, and you're cooled down by 12 double heat sinks. The reason for that is that your weapons are no longer strictly ballistic. You get a pair of PPCs backed by a pair of Ultra AC2s. So you do get that volume of fire from ballistic weapons, and you get the nice big punch of particle cannons. Your chest still mounts a pair of medium lasers, which are decent enough at closer range, since everything else is going to have a minimum range where the weapons are not as efficient as they should be. The more popular of the two, though, was the 70-ton JagerMech Series 7. The basic JM7D basically just increases the weight and then put 4.5 tons of extra ferrofibrous plates on top of everything. You have the 2-class autocannon swapped with a pair of ER large lasers, and to compensate for the increased E-curve, which is quite big for ER large lasers, you get 13 double heat sinks. You still sadly have that pair of medium pulse lasers, which should have been swapped for standard mediums, or have a pair of them, or, medium pulse lasers are just terrible. This is basically a 70-ton Rifleman at that point, with decent cooling capacity and decent armor. It really works perfectly fine in that anti-air role and can even do a very nice job at frontline fighting. The JM7F was an upgrade kit for the design that came out in 3062. The arm guns are replaced by a pair of Rotary AC5 with 4 tons of reloads, all stored on the left side. This means you need to stay close to supply lines and basically turn yourself on the right side to absorb shots. Your center torso is a pair of medium pulse lasers for defense, and that would probably be something I would once again strip and put something more useful in. This is supported by a Guardian ECM to protect you from enemy electronic warfare, and all your weapons are tied to a targeting computer, which means you're going to get decent accuracy, but you can't pinpoint fire with any of them. The JM7G entered production in the early Jihad era and is a pure anti-air support machine. This one now has a pair of Rotary AC2s and LB2Xs in the arm, with 4 tons of reload for the Rotaries and 2 tons of reloads for the LBX. So you'll be able to walk around with clusters and lugs. You pair a set of ER medium lasers in your belly in case you run out of ammo, and to give you a little bit more power if something flies overhead. 11 double heat sinks should keep you cool, but shooting 2 Rotary AC2s at full range is going to generate a decent amount of heat, so you might have to be a little bit careful. The JM7 series kept trucking on with the C3BS in 3075. This one gives you a pair of light AC2s and snub-nose PPCs in the arms. You get a decent amount of firepower, but very limited range, which is a little bit odd on a JagerMech. You're going to be able to surprise people, of course, with that, but it's probably not my favorite. You do have 2 tons of reloads for the light AC2, so you can pack a set of specialty ammo, usually a set of precision, and a set of armor piercings. You also have a single ER medium laser for backup, and your comms and targeting system is tied to a C3 boosted slave. The most recent models started coming out of the facilities in 3146 with the JM7DD, which uses the knowledge the Federated Sons have gathered over the years on autocannons to make a thing that is quite successful. It has 11 tons of ferrofibrous plate on an endo composite structure, so you save a little bit of weight and you get a decent amount of protection. Where it's a bit of a risk is that the XL engine is now tied to an XL gyro, so a lot of that internal space is going to be used by that engine and that gyro assembly, which makes it a little bit more fragile. For weapons, though, you get a pair of clan-graded Ultra 10 class autocannons, which are built locally rather than having to buy them off Clan Seafox. They actually figured out how to make autocannons to the higher standard. You do get very good range on Ultra AC-10s. It's better than the standard autocannons. Those are very, very good weapons for anti-air support as well. The other backup is a pair of light AC5s with 2 tons of reload, so you can set up precision and AP rounds. Your torso mounts a pair of inner sphere grade ER medium lasers unless they're able to get their hands on Seafox produced ER medium lasers. So this one here is entirely functional and will probably be seen on the battlefields quite often in the near future. Give them another couple of decades and the D-Davians might actually be able to make a fully clan-graded JagerMech, which might actually be pretty darn good. The lack of AA gun platforms mean that the JagerMech is going to stay around up until maybe something completely supplants both the JagerMech and the Rifleman. The other problem, though, is that, well, the clans have the Glass Spider and they have the Rifleman 2C, which are some of the best AA guns out there. But since not everybody has access to clan-grade weapons or clan-grade technology or factories that build either the Glass Spider or the Rifleman 2C, some of those more modern JagerMechs will have to do the job until they are modernized once more afterwards. So I thank you very much for listening to me for so long. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.